When you think of the first werewolf, what comes to mind? Perhaps the image of a cursed man, bound to the full moon, condemned to transform into a beast. But what if I told you that this story is much older and far more complex than it seems? That the first accounts of men turning into beasts date back to ancient civilizations, where mythology, religion, and magic blended into a cauldron of beliefs about the power of the gods and the terrible curses they could cast. And we're not talking about medieval Europe, but much earlier times in a region you might never have imagined. The truth is, the origin of the first werewolf is hidden deep within ancient Mesopotamia, in the fertile lands of Sumer, where gods would punish and transform men into beasts. The story isn't just about monsters roaming the night, but about divine power, the secrets of dark magic, and the complex relationship between man and the wild. Imagine a world where priests could cast spells to turn warriors into bestial creatures, and where kings were punished for their arrogance, condemned to live as beasts forever. It's in this setting that we begin to uncover the true beginnings of this legend. What's even more fascinating is that while many believe the werewolf myth has its roots in Europe, its true origin is tied to ancient civilizations that shaped the course of history. What did these cultures believe about the transformation of men into beasts? And why has this myth survived for so long, crossing continents and eras? Get ready to dive into a journey that goes far beyond popular legends and takes us to the heart of a story few know, but that still resonates today. If you're curious to know where and how it all began, and why the idea of a man turning into a wolf is so powerful and universal, then stay with me. What you're about to discover may completely change the way you see this iconic creature from ancient mythologies and modern folklore. Are you ready to explore the origins of this myth and understand what the curse of being a werewolf really means? From the earliest times, civilizations were steeped in myths and legends that explained the uncontrollable forces of nature. In ancient Sumer, it was no different. One of the most intriguing myths involves the curse of transformation, where humans were condemned by the gods to live as beasts. Some records describe the transformation into monstrous creatures that roamed the land, terrorizing entire villages. The figure of the modern werewolf may have its roots precisely in these Sumerian tales, where divine wrath fell upon those who dared to defy sacred laws. However, the curse wasn't a simple punishment. Upon being transformed into beasts, these humans lost their humanity, becoming creatures driven purely by instinct. In Sumer, this was the worst form of punishment, as it meant total loss of self-control. Looking back at these ancient stories, we realize that the fear of transforming into a beast transcends mere physical appearance. It was, above all, a sentence of isolation and condemnation to the wild, with no right to reconnect with society. The werewolf, in modern culture, still carries this weight of loneliness and damnation. Some legends even suggest that these beastmen were the result of dark magic, a pact made with sinister forces in exchange for power or revenge. The practice of magic, often viewed with suspicion by the Sumerians, was frequently attributed to those who sought to alter the natural course of things. And it was the sorcerers themselves who paid the price, becoming victims of their own unchecked ambitions. The belief that the transformation into a werewolf could be caused by spells or rituals has its roots in these myths, where the line between magic and curse was very thin. Interestingly, these transformations weren't always seen as punishments. In some cases, the Sumerians believed that the beasts created by curses served a greater purpose, perhaps as divine instruments to restore balance to lands ravaged by war and famine. These creatures, part human and part beast, could be used to terrorize enemies or protect sacred temples. It's fascinating to think that even while cursed, they still had a role in the grand scheme of divine forces, a concept that echoes today in legends about supernatural beings. And so, we begin to see how the curse of transformation, born in the fertile lands of ancient Mesopotamia, influenced later mythologies, such as Greek and Norse mythology. But what could trigger this transformation so intensely? Perhaps the moon plays a central role in this, as we'll explore next. The moon, with its eternal cycle of phases, has always been a central figure in various ancient mythologies, including the Sumerian. In Sumer, the moon was not just a celestial body, but a symbol of power, mystery, and transformation. It represented both the balance of natural forces and internal changes, and many believe that its influence could alter men's destinies. In transformation legends, the full moon, which we now associate with werewolves, was already seen as a catalyst for supernatural events. Under its silver light, humans could lose their shapes and fall under terrible curses, transforming into wild beasts. In ancient texts, the moon was linked to Nana, the moon god, a fundamental deity in Sumerian culture. He controlled not only the tides and agriculture, but also the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. This control over natural cycles could explain the role of the moon in mystical transformations. It was believed that, under Nana's gaze, the transformed creatures were governed by the forces of nature. In a way, what was seen was a manifestation of the balance between the spiritual and the physical worlds. Thus, the moon didn't just witness the transformation, but was also a symbol of this fusion between human and animal. The connection between the moon and transformation was also rooted in the rhythms of Sumerian life itself. As an agrarian society, they lived according to lunar cycles and saw the full moon as a time of maximum potential, both for growth and danger. For them, this was the moment when the boundary between worlds became thinnest. The idea that creatures like werewolves emerge in the light of the full moon may have its origin in these beliefs, where lunar power amplified the magic and latent evils within people. On the brightest nights, control over one's form could slip away, revealing the beast hidden within the man. It's interesting to note that, despite the modern association of the full moon with danger and chaos, the Sumerians also viewed the moon as a force of balance. It was both a guardian and a destroyer. Under its influence, beastmen could be used as instruments of the gods, channeling destructive energy for divine purposes. The werewolf, therefore, wasn't just a wild, uncontrollable creature, but part of a larger cycle of transformation and renewal, much like the moon itself in its phases. The transformation wasn't only physical, but spiritual, reflecting an inner journey that every human, on some level, was destined to take. And it's precisely this duality of the moon that makes it so fascinating. On one hand, it represents light in the darkness, a guide during the darkest nights. On the other, it is a gateway to forces beyond our control, capable of turning men into beasts. This ambiguity was at the heart of Sumerian legends and continues to resonate in mythologies around the world. But there is more to it than just the moon and its phases. What about the Sumerian gods themselves, who could transform men into beasts to serve their divine purposes? In Sumerian mythology, the gods often took on hybrid forms, combining human aspects with animal traits. These animal gods were revered as powerful entities, symbolizing natural forces that humans had to respect or fear. This direct connection between gods and beasts reinforced the idea that transformation into beasts was not just a curse or punishment, but, in some cases, a service to the gods themselves. In many Sumerian legends, men who were transformed into wild creatures took on this burden as an act of devotion, serving directly under these animal gods. A fascinating example of this connection is Enlil, one of the most powerful gods in the Sumerian pantheon. Although he was often depicted with human attributes, his actions and the strength of his presence were linked to wild animals, representing his control over nature. In certain legends, Sumerian warriors would volunteer to transform into beasts, believing that by doing so, they could honor Enlil and protect the sacred temples. These feral warriors were both feared and revered, as their violent actions were seen as manifestations of divine will. However, not all transformations were voluntary. In many cases, the gods imposed these metamorphoses as a way to test the loyalty of their followers or punish enemies of the faith. Men captured in battle or guilty of grave blasphemies could be transformed into beasts and condemned to serve the gods as irrational creatures. These stories echo the idea that transformation, even when unwanted, connected the person to a sacred mission. The figure of the werewolf in modern legends, though often seen as a cursed creature, may have roots in this concept, where metamorphosis involved a sacred responsibility, even if imposed. The connection with animal gods also reinforces the idea that beasts weren't inherently evil. For the Sumerians, animals represented vital forces of the cosmos, essential to the balance between the natural and spiritual worlds. Being transformed into one of these beasts meant participating in this cosmic balance, becoming a direct instrument of divine will. An interesting parallel can be drawn with Egyptian mythology, where deities like Anubis, the jackal-headed god, symbolize this link between human and animal, mortal and immortal. Greek mythology, with figures like the centaurs, also explores this same transition between forms. This notion that gods used beastmen for their own divine purposes opens up a new perspective on the role of these creatures in mythology. They weren't just monsters wandering aimlessly. Rather, they were deeply woven into the spiritual and religious fabric of Sumer. However, the question remains, what happens to those who aren't serving the gods? What about the curses that transform men into beasts as a form of perpetual punishment? This is the next issue to explore. The concept of divine punishment in ancient Sumer was severe and unforgiving. For those who defied the gods, the consequences could be devastating. And one of the most feared punishments was the transformation into a beast. This curse was seen as a double condemnation. Not only did the individual lose their human form, but also their humanity and dignity. Living as a bestial creature was a fate worse than death, as it meant a complete break from society, customs, and most importantly, spirituality. The myth of the werewolf, as we know it today, carries this echo of loss and despair. However, transformation into a beast was not an arbitrary punishment. In many cases, this metamorphosis was a direct response to acts considered affronts to the gods, such as betrayal, sacrilege, or transgression of sacred laws. A classic example of these punishments can be found in stories of kings and nobles who, due to their arrogance, were transformed into bestial creatures, condemned to wander the deserts and forests. The condemnation to isolation and a wild life was a clear message that the gods did not tolerate disrespect. Similarly, in many versions of the modern werewolf, the curse is brought on by past actions, symbolizing a loss of control over one's own life. Sumerian legends also suggest that transformation was not merely a physical change, but a complete disintegration of identity. Upon becoming a beast, the individual lost touch with their rational side, surrendering completely to primal instincts. This idea is widely reflected in modern werewolf stories, where the transformation is often accompanied by a loss of mental control, as if the inner beast takes over the human mind. The psychological torment of being trapped in a body that no longer feels like one's own is an aspect of the curse that reverberates across cultures, from Greek mythology with figures like Lycaon to Celtic legends. In some versions, however, this condemnation was not permanent. There was the hope of redemption, but it was almost unattainable. Only through great spiritual effort, or the intervention of a god or powerful sorcerer, could the cursed individual regain their human form. This idea of a difficult and rare cure persists in modern werewolf narratives, where transformation is often reversible, but at a cost. Sumerian rituals to try and reverse these curses involved conviction that connection with the gods was the only way to escape such a terrible fate. Living as a beast also brought with it a profound loss of social status. In Sumerian society, where hierarchy was everything, being transformed into a wild creature was equivalent to being stripped of all honor and prestige. This social demotion, combined with the destruction of identity, made the curse even more cruel. But it wasn't just sinners who feared transformation. Priests also knew the secrets of magic that could invoke this type of metamorphosis for their own purposes, as we will explore next. Magic in Sumer was a powerful and enigmatic force, deeply rooted in religious practices and everyday beliefs. Priests and sorcerers held secret knowledge of spells that could alter reality, including the ability to transform men into beasts. These enchantments, often considered dangerous, were not used lightly. The manipulation of hidden forces could bring both blessings and devastating curses. It's from this use of magic for transformation that many legends about men turning into beasts emerge, whether by choice or through imposition. Sumerian texts speak of complex rituals involving offerings to the gods and invocations of spirits to perform transformations. Some of these spells could be used to create powerful warriors who would take on the characteristics of wild animals, like the strength of a lion or the cunning of a wolf. An interesting parallel can be drawn with the modern werewolf legend, where black magic or powerful curses transform humans into monstrous creatures. In Sumer, sorcerers were feared not only for their wisdom, but also for their ability to manipulate both the physical and spiritual worlds, controlling the beasts they created. However, the use of this magic wasn't always evil. In certain cases, sorcerers used transformation as a means of controlling the chaotic forces of nature. It was believed that by transforming a man into a beast, they could channel that wild energy to protect territory or serve the interests of the gods. These beastmen could become guardians of temples or leaders of armies, endowed with superhuman abilities. In this perspective, magic was seen as a tool to balance order and chaos, much like the duality we find in werewolf legends, where transformation can bring both destruction and protection. Sumerian priests, on the other hand, were masters at creating and controlling these creatures. They used specific spells to invoke the transformation and, in some cases, maintain control over the beasts of werewolves, who are linked to the moon and can be controlled by external forces like amulets or spells. The Sumerians saw transformation not just as a form of punishment or power, but also as a way to demonstrate the supremacy of their gods over the animal kingdom and mankind itself. But as with all magic, controlling these transformations was risky. If not performed correctly, the rituals could spiral out of control, resulting in uncontrollable creatures that roamed cities and villages, spreading terror. The figure of the modern werewolf, a tormented being unable to contain its own ferocity, may have its roots in these ancient fears. However, not all these beasts were seen as destructive monsters. Some believed that with the right magic, they could serve as divine protectors, leading to an intriguing question. Could werewolves actually be protectors rather than just predators? When we think of werewolves, we usually imagine monstrous, violent creatures destined to spread chaos. But in ancient Sumer, there are indications that these creatures, transformed by magic or curse, could also serve a nobler purpose, that of mystical guardians. Instead of being mere instruments of destruction, some beastmen were created by the gods to protect sacred places, like temples or gateways to the spiritual world. These beasts, though feared for their ferocity, were actually seen as part of the cosmic balance, maintaining harmony between the physical and spiritual worlds. These guardian werewolves were described as creatures of incredible strength and superhuman abilities, designated to protect divine interests on Earth. If we consider Greek mythology with its transformed heroes or hybrid creatures like centaurs or the Minotaur, we see a clear parallel. In Sumer, these creatures weren't just servants of the gods. They also had a sacred mission to protect the secrets of the spiritual world. In this way, men who transformed into beasts weren't seen as cursed beings, but as chosen ones, fulfilling a vital role in maintaining the universe's balance. The role of protector that these werewolves assumed could also be linked to the idea that certain areas of Earth were directly connected to divine realms. It was believed that these places needed to be guarded by special beings capable of navigating the boundaries between the world of the living and the world of spirits. Thus, these protective beasts, half human and half animal, were fit to patrol these territories, ensuring that no destructive force or evil entity crossed the sacred barriers. In modern folklore, we find echoes of this belief in tales of werewolves guarding cemeteries or enchanted forests, protecting what is most sacred. Moreover, the role of guardian that these beastmen played was also proof that ferocity and violence could be channeled for good. The Sumerians believed that wild nature wasn't something to be completely suppressed, but rather controlled and directed. This was reflected in the rituals where priests invoked these protective beasts, transforming humans into creatures capable of fighting against the gods' enemies. In many contemporary legends, we find werewolves who, despite their wild nature, struggle to protect those they love, a direct reflection of this ancient view that chaos, when well guided, can be a force for protection. This concept of werewolves as guardians makes us reconsider the role of these creatures in mythology. Contrary to the popular image of uncontrollable monsters, the werewolves of Sumer may have been seen as defenders of divine secrets and the boundaries between the human and spiritual worlds. But to better understand this duality, the man who becomes a beast but still has a spiritual mission, we need to explore the idea that werewolves represented a transition between the physical and spiritual worlds. And that's exactly what we'll delve into next. The symbolism behind the transformation from man to beast goes beyond the physical. In Sumer, this change represented a profound transition between the spiritual and animal worlds, reflecting the complexity of human nature. Werewolves, or beastmen, stood in an intermediary space, connected to both the divine and the wild. In many ancient cultures, transforming into a beastly creature symbolized the fusion of these two worlds, the human and the animal, the rational and the instinctive. This idea can be seen as a metaphor for the internal struggle humans face in balancing their natural tendencies with their spiritual obligations. In Sumerian mythology, the transition between the human and animal world wasn't seen as purely negative. On the contrary, it represented the quest for a deeper understanding of nature's and spirit's forces. Transforming into a beast could mean that a man was in direct contact with the primal aspects of existence, such as the instinct for survival, brute strength, and divine power. Thus, werewolves, as terrifying as they might have been, could symbolize humanity's struggle to find its place between the sacred and the mundane. This inner journey also resonates with Norse mythology, where berserker warriors would become beasts to connect with the forces of nature. For the Sumerians, the transformation into a beast served as a reminder that humans weren't entirely separate from the animal kingdom. Instead, humanity was part of a larger natural cycle, and losing control of one's human form symbolized a return to that primal state. However, this return also carried spiritual implications. The idea that transformation represented a transition between the physical and spiritual world is found in various cultures, including Egyptian mythology, where gods often had hybrid forms of men and animals. The internal beast of man, therefore, wasn't merely something to be feared, but also something to be understood. This dual symbolism can be observed in modern werewolf stories, where the transformation isn't just a curse, but also an opportunity for the character to better understand their true nature. The battle between the man and the beast within is a recurring theme, representing the conflict between civilization and savagery, control and chaos. In Sumer, this dilemma was directly linked to religion, where the gods had the ability to transform and control these natural forces. The man who became a beast underwent a kind of spiritual journey, where he was forced to confront his weaknesses, desires, and deepest fears. Thus, the werewolf in Sumerian mythology was much more than a monster. It symbolized the connection between the spiritual and the animal worlds, a point of convergence between the wild and the divine. This complexity makes the myth even more fascinating, showing that beasts, far from being mere destroyers, could carry within them hidden wisdom, a form of transcendence. But these reflections naturally lead us to consider how these themes evolved and spread to other ancient cultures, creating similar myths in distant civilizations. So, with this idea in mind, where did the first werewolf truly originate? This leads us to an even more intriguing question. Now that you know the true origin of the werewolf myth, it's impossible not to reflect on the impact this story still holds today. The idea of a human transforming into a beast goes beyond a simple legend. It forces us to question our own nature, the balance between reason and instinct, civilization and savagery. Transformation, whether physical or symbolic, represents a dilemma that transcends cultures and ancient civilizations. from the Sumerians to modern folklore. And you, have you ever stopped to think about what these myths can say about the internal struggles we all face? If you enjoyed this story, told through the lens of ancient civilizations, I invite you to keep exploring these fascinating tales. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any videos. That way, you can continue learning more about mythology, legends, and their meaning in how we view the world. After all, there's so much more to uncover about the mysteries of ancient civilizations and the legends that have shaped our imagination.